Hello, everyone, and welcome to Setting Sail, Insights and Action from MMGY's Portrait of International Cruise Travelers. I'm Katie Briscoe. On behalf of MMGY, I want to thank you for joining us today as we explore how cruising continues to evolve and what that means for marketers, strategists, and other decision makers across the travel and tourism industry. This webinar is presented in partnership with Travelzoo. We're incredibly grateful for their collaboration and for helping to advance important conversations in our industry. Together, we set out to better understand cruise travelers, who they are today, how they make decisions, and what's shaping their intent in the years ahead. The Portrait of International Cruise Travelers is a global study spanning the US, UK, Canada, and German markets. These are 4 markets that represent over 2/3 of the global cruise industry. Or the global cruise market, excuse me. What we uncovered goes far beyond demographics. It's about behaviors, expectations, and opportunities. These insights provide a crucial roadmap for how brands can connect with current and future cruisers. But we do know that data isn't enough. That's why we're doing this webinar, not just to present the findings of the study, but to help you understand how to act on them. First, you'll hear from Simon Moriarty, our Vice President of Syndicated Research, who will present key takeaways from our study. But then we'll transition into a panel discussion moderated by Gabe Saglia, who's a senior editor at Travelzoo. We've assembled an incredible panel of seasoned leaders from across MMGY, experts in media, strategy, and PR, to demonstrate how these insights can better inform your planning and campaigns. At MMGY, one of our greatest strengths is the integrated approach. We don't just deliver on research or media, but we work across the entire marketing ecosystem. And today's session is a great example of how that integration comes to life to create a more unified, effective strategies across our partners and portfolio. We're excited to share this with you and even more excited to see how it sparks new thinking and conversation across our industry. So with that, I would love to welcome Simon Moriarty, VP of Syndicated Research, to share insights from this year's Portrait of International Cruise Travelers.
Thank you very much, Katie, and thank you, everyone. Welcome aboard, and I'm very delighted to be the opening act on the cruise today. And very much looking forward to the panel discussion, as Katie mentioned. This is a hugely important study that we carried out earlier this year in collaboration with our valued partners at Travelzoo. Huge amount of interesting and important insight. And my role today is to really give you an overview of the key insights, the key action points, the things to think about from the study that covered those 4 markets. And it really was, for the purposes of today, it's a kind of a whistle-stop tour of the key findings, but the report goes into a lot of depth. And we did it in 2 different ways. Firstly, we ran a survey across the general population, covering a representative sample across those 4 markets, the US, the UK, Canada, and Germany. And at the same time, our partners at Travelzoo ran a very similar study, which we had worked with them on very closely across their membership cohorts. And then we were able then to create comparative analysis and show different opportunities, different gaps, not just in terms of Travelzoo versus non-Travelzoo members, but also cruisers and non-cruisers. So really opening up opportunities for those who are invested in the cruise industry and really looking at the patterns of behavior in terms of booking, motivations, and so on when it comes to choosing cruise, both if you're an experienced cruiser and if you're a first-time cruiser. And it was a real in-depth look at the industry, and it really looked across all of those different motivations and preferences that different types of travel audience have, which we were also able to break down into different countries as well to see the variances across the different markets that we covered. And really looking at how active cruisers, those who are regular cruisers who have some experience of cruising in the last couple of years, really differ from those who have not yet cruised but have expressed an interest in doing so. And looking at how those prospects and Travelzoo members also differ. And again, showing those similarities, those differences to really open up the implications for the market. And just in terms of methodology, it was an online survey across active leisure travelers. You can see the numbers there in terms of the number of cruisers versus the number of prospects, just over 6,000. As I said, we also surveyed Travelzoo members, so just over 8,200 of those across the same markets to really get a full picture of the similarities and differences between that audience, the Travelzoo membership audience, and then the non-members who were made up of cruisers and prospects. And we split the study into a number of different sections. One of the key things that we looked at is perception. It's all about how people perceive cruising, both from a experienced cruiser point of view, but also those who are thinking about taking a cruise in the near future and looking at what it is that's driving those different audiences to make decisions about cruising. And you can see here some key data in terms of how people across those two different audiences view cruising. The top line is both groups combined, and then you can see prospects and cruisers split out into more detail. The majority consider cruising to be a luxury vacation. Those who have cruised slightly more so than those who are prospects. A chance to relax as well, skewed towards those who have cruised. A fun family getaway. Prospects, interestingly, aren't particularly seeing cruise as something that they would take their family on. Again, perhaps because they haven't done it yet, they're not sure of how things work on board. But interestingly, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity is how cruise is perceived by more significant number of prospects compared to just 8% of cruisers, which really emphasizes a sense of loyalty in the cruise space. Once people have cruised, then they're likely not to consider it as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, not just because they've done it once, but they are potentially likely to do it again and again. And it becomes something that, while not a routine and still a special occasion, a special event, is something that doesn't have that kind of aura of a one-off. And you can see here as well, we have information about how those Travelzoo members are compared to all respondents that took the survey. And Travelzoo members are more likely to see cruises as something that is adventure-filled. It's a chance to relax compared to all respondents. All respondents, 29% compared to 14% of Travelzoo members see cruise very much as a luxury vacation or as a fun family getaway, as I said. But 31% of Travelzoo members see it as a chance to relax and disconnect, compared to just 20% of all respondents. And again, a significant difference when it comes to the sense of cruising being an adventure-filled journey, 26% compared to just 12% of all respondents. We also asked about luxury as a whole, in terms of how luxury is perceived. Luxury and cruising tend to go hand in hand in terms of perception, and certainly traditionally that's how the cruise industry is often seen. But asking people about their perceptions of cruise and then separately asking them about perceptions of luxury really gives us a lot of information about how those things may be not as closely connected as we think, or where they are connected, where there are opportunities to really enhance and emphasize the luxury elements, and also thinking about what luxury actually means to people. And overall, we found that comfort, premium accommodations on board, and fine dining, the availability of different culinary experiences, they are the things that really define luxury cruising for people. So when we asked specifically about luxury cruising, 69% of all respondents said it was all about the highest level of comfort and amenities. 65% really focused on the accommodations, so things like premium suites, staterooms, and then just a smaller number slightly is 64% focused on the fine dining. But in terms of perception of luxury as a whole, a quarter of respondents, their perception of luxury is a blend of comfort and convenience and service. It's not just one thing or another. People, when they think about luxury, particularly with vacations, are looking at a combination of all the different factors that make their experience something really special. They also consider things like cost as well, but they're looking at all the different elements that, in this case, make up cruise and give them a sense of being treated in a way that they expect, and also really emphasizing the specialness of what cruising can offer to people. But we also know that luxury for a lot of people, 15% of all respondents, luxury is more about experiences than material possessions, and cruising really is all about experiences for a lot of people. And you can see here the difference between the Travelzoo membership and all respondents. Pricing is important in terms of all inclusivity for Travelzoo members at 66%, but those experiences also play a huge part. Compared to all respondents, over half of Travelzoo members, 52%, really think smaller ships with fewer passengers define luxury. So these intimate experiences are what drives them to think about the luxury elements of cruise. And in terms of decision making, when it comes to booking a cruise for the first time or booking a cruise for the second, 10th, 100th time, there's lots of different things that motivate people to make those decisions. And you can see there's some real differences and some real distances between the things that people are motivated by. Ports of call are by far the most important factor, perhaps unsurprisingly, when consumers plan a cruise. So we asked respondents to rank their top 3 out of all of these different attributes that you can see on the screen, and you'll see there 76% say that destinations and ports of call that are of interest to them are the most important factor. People don't just want to be on a cruise for the sake of being on the cruise. They also want to go to the places that they want to go to. And you can see a large number of prospects at 77% and a slightly smaller cohort of cruisers at 73% agree that destinations are the most important factor. And then the remaining factors that are important, you can see a fairly significant drop-off, but still significant numbers of people who rank the reputation of the cruise line, the ship itself, and special offers and or discounts as significant. And then a further drop down to smaller numbers who are ranking things like flexibility, reviews from their peers, from their friends and family, ease of departure, so no fly departures, for example. Sustainability at 10%. Sustainability is something that is growing in importance when it comes to motivation, but when people are asked to rank it against other motivating factors, it doesn't score as highly. Advertising as well, there's opportunities there perhaps to look at how that motivates people or what the role of advertising is in as a motivating factor. Just 8% of people ranked it in their top 3. And then things like kids clubs and babysitting, which kind of resonates with the earlier point about fewer people thinking of cruising from a prospect point of view as an opportunity to spend time with their family. They're not necessarily considering the babysitting and kids clubs opportunities that are available. And then also importantly, just 2% are looking at accessibility and wheelchair access as an important factor to plan a cruise, which suggests that there may be a gap in awareness in terms of those potential passengers who have mobility or accessibility needs, thinking that cruising may not be appropriate or able to cater to their needs, when in fact those opportunities might be there. So again, perhaps communicating, raising awareness is a key takeaway there. And there's a clear difference in priorities between cruisers and new prospects in terms of what they choose and why they choose it. So 45% of prospects would choose a cruise based on the best offer. 35% would choose a cruise based on the itinerary. You can see the difference there between themselves and the cruisers. And then for obvious reasons, just under half of cruisers love experiencing new cruise ships. So again, it's not just about all of the things on board, it's about the novelty. Even if you've cruised before, it's about the new experiences, the new opportunities to engage with customers on board. And special offers, price is always going to be important, but it's not just about finding the cheapest options, it's about the offers that appeal to you at the time that they're relevant as well. Special offers are more likely to drive decisions for prospects compared to those experienced cruisers. You can see 39% of prospects say that special offers and discounts motivate them compared to 32% of cruisers. And cruisers are more likely to make decisions based on the ship itself. So while ports of call are a key driver, if not the key driver for choosing a cruise in terms of making that decision about which one you want to take, because there are a lot of options available, the ship itself is hugely significant. It really highlights that the journey as well as the destination are significant. And think about Travelzoo members, they're also drawn to special offers, but it's important to think about how it's about value rather than just simply looking for the cheapest option. Even within the highest tier available, Travelzoo members are always looking for the options that work best for them and their needs and their requirements. It's the trip that they desire above all, but you can see there that 65% are drawn in by special offers and discounts available compared to just 37% of all respondents. And to finish up, some information about booking to boarding, that timeline. We see that just over 70% of holidays are planned between 3 and 12 months in advance. You can see there it's a fairly even split between 3 to 6 months and 6 to 12 months. So people are planning relatively long time in advance. So they're spending time thinking about where they want to go and then thinking long term ahead. So when they actually get on board, there's been a fairly significant amount of time since they booked the trip where they've potentially spent a lot of that time thinking about and expecting different things on board, different services, different experiences. And in terms of the length of cruise, mid-length cruises are the most popular. Again, for lots of different reasons, in terms of the amount of time people have to take vacation, how much time they can spare from work and from school, taking their kids out of school, for example. And 3 and 4, a similar number to the previous slide, plan to cruise for between 6 and 14 nights. So they like to experience lots of things on board, but it's important for cruise lines, for brands, for anyone involved in the industry to understand the different priorities that they have when they do go on board, to make sure that you are catering to them in the most appropriate way, considering the amount of time they have on the ship. So that was very much a whistle-stop tour of the reports. And just to give you some key takeaways, the four markets that we covered, Canada, Germany, US, UK, they represent between 65 and 70% of the global cruise market, and 18 of the 32 million annual cruise travelers are from the US. As I said, and as this whole session is about, it's about celebrating the partnership as well as the research. It's the partnership between ourselves and Travelzoo, and the extensive reach that Travelzoo has across these key markets allows their partners to align their cruise offerings with region-specific preferences. And we've seen from our research how those regional preferences really differ and really stand out. And it could be promoting premiumization to UK travelers, immersive cruises focusing on different cultures to German travelers, and then looking at value-driven and bundled offers to North Americans. These are just a snippet of the findings and the insights that we drew from the research. And then to give you some key takeaways, multi-destination itineraries are a major draw. People want to visit multiple destinations, bucket list destinations. That's important to both first-time cruisers and the travelers who may only take one cruise in their lifetime. Relaxation and wellness remain a top priority across the general population, which really enhances the appeal and really focuses the appeal of all-inclusivity, bundle flights, cruise upgrades, allowing people to unwind, taking away the stress that is associated with travel, particularly for those who haven't cruised before, where there'll be an added layer of anxiety or preconception about what the cruise experience might be like. And you can see here there's a number of key things that are different across those markets, which I touched on. Exploration and cultural immersion are important for German travelers, special offers and all-inclusive packages for North Americans. UK travelers demonstrate a stronger interest compared to the other respondents for premium cruise brands. And then Canadian travelers consider the reputation of the cruise line to be a top priority. And we also see, when we think about booking behaviors, the family-friendly offerings, couple-oriented cruises are both highly sought after. And these travel groups are making up 3 in 4 of the travel parties. And I mentioned sustainability earlier. It's an emerging influence, particularly amongst the British and German side of that audience that we surveyed. And they're drawn to eco-friendly initiatives that offer things like tourism, but also minimize the cruise's impact on communities, the economies that they visit. Those cruise lines that integrate sustainability into their offerings, so things like sourcing local food and drink for the culinary experiences, those that support the regional economies that they're visiting, they're the ones that will resonate with those audiences. So thank you very much for your time today, and thank you again to our friends at Travelzoo. And I will now pass over to Gabe.
All right, thank you very much, Simon. That was great. And hi, everybody. I'm Gabe Saglier, senior editor for Travelzoo, joining you from Los Angeles, so 8 time zones in the past, I guess, for Simon. And I've got the lucky opportunity today to pick the brains of 3 stalwarts in the MMGY universe. And as I mentioned your name, guys, go ahead and come online, and we'll get our conversation started here in just a sec. For those of you tuning in, there is a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. I will be checking that throughout the course of this conversation. We will reserve time for Q&A at the end of our discussion. But if you've got a burning question during the discussion, please feel free to throw it in there. We're happy to accommodate that as the questions come in, especially as they dovetail into the conversations we're having at the moment. I certainly am always happy to see results of these global surveys. You know, we consider Travelzoo members to be sort of the epitome of the engaged travel enthusiast out there, and to see sort of how things are different and the same from region to region, from age group to age group, is always a fascinating thing. So we'll dive a little bit deeper here with the following folks. Trey Williams, he's a senior vice president of strategic planning for MMGY. Lauren Kaufman is Managing Director for Public Relations for MMGY, and Bill Steinke is Vice President and Group Media Director for MMGY. So an illustrious trio here, and happy to engage all of you in conversation today. Trey, I thought I'd start with you, because one of the things I think is fascinating about the results we just saw is this sort of regional snapshot, how perceptions, how habits are different for cruisers or new to cruise individuals might be in North America versus Europe. And no matter where we are in the world, I think when it comes to cruising, there's always a little bit of this tension between price sensitivity and this desire for value, and then this perception of luxury. We want the luxury, we also want a value proposition. And I'm wondering how you might perceive we reconcile this in the cruise industry, and how that might be different from, say, regions in North America versus some of the data we saw out of regions in Europe as well.
Absolutely. Thanks, Gabe. Thanks for the introduction and also for the great question. I think what we're seeing now, especially as it relates to perceptions of luxury, is sort of an after effect of that revenge travel, that phase that we saw immediately post-COVID lockdowns, where we had travelers who may not have necessarily been high net worth, but have developed a taste for those premium services. I probably definitely fall in into that bucket of that aspirational luxury traveler who has those champagne tastes on a beer budget. Especially among our younger travelers, we're seeing the idea of luxury really shift. It's less about prestige or status, the things that we traditionally associate with luxury, and it's more about exclusivity, personalization, receiving the highest quality. And I think that was reflected in the data that Simon just presented to us around those 25% of the respondents who said that for them luxury is really about comfort and convenience. And so we're seeing, especially across the regions, those two different types of luxury travelers shake out. You have your more aspirational traveler, luxury traveler, and then you have your more traditional high-income luxury traveler. On the traditional side, I think we're starting to see a shift as well, where those high-income travelers are starting to become sort of disillusioned with the idea of luxury services, because they're starting to see this standardization of what luxury sort of looks and feels like. Brands are starting to kind of shift and appeal to those aspirational travelers, and luxury is kind of starting to look the same across the board. And this is reflected in the data where, we're starting to see more people wanting more time to explore the destination, or more interesting destinations to help them overcome that price sensitivity. People are starting to ask for more of luxury brands, stepping out of that standardization and starting to want more. So, cruise brands really need to think about their approach to how they speak to these two different audiences, whether it's the traditional luxury audience who we're seeing more in the US and the UK, or more the aspirational that we're seeing on the more price sensitive side in Germany and Canada. So for those aspirational luxury travelers, it's really about how do we make the experience feel custom to them? How do we really start to ramp up that personalization? Whereas on the traditional luxury traveler side, how do cruises make that experience feel one of a kind? Custom to you and one of a kind might kind of sound like the same thing, but really I'm talking about creating a custom experience based on the tastes of the traveler, or creating something that is so big and just one of a kind that no one else is going to feel like they have that exact thing. Even if their tastes align with a million other people, they're seeing something that is kind of a bucket list item.
You mentioned revenge travel trade, which I think is fascinating, because I think that accounts for some of the record-setting numbers we've seen both in cruise and sort of travel in general. Certainly an opportunity, I think, to lure new travelers onto cruise ships. And of course, the challenge becomes to maintain them and keep them coming back. But as Simon pointed out, once you get them on board, I think getting them to come back becomes a much easier prospect.
Yes.
Lauren, when it comes to putting messaging out there, what resonates, do you think, globally? And are there message points that resonate differently in, say, in North America, US and Canada, and Europe? So, I mean, I feel like there's probably a common thread there, but really you dive in a little bit deeper. There are certainly messaging aspects that will resonate differently depending on what side of the Atlantic the target audience might be.
Absolutely, and a great question. In July, I actually had the pleasure
Welcome to VoiceOver. VoiceOver speaks descriptions of items on the screen.
Sorry.
Ignore that, Lauren. That's just
personality. Yeah,
an AI reminder. There you go.
I work, we are the AOR for Oceania Cruises, and we do the global PR. So we just launched the Oceania Laura. If anyone's been reading the papers, hopefully you've read about it. We had 53 global media on board on 2 back-to-back cruises. And what I found was really interesting was what the questions were being raised by North America versus UK, LATAM, EU, the APAC regions. And especially when we're doing the one-on-one interviews with the executives, like with the different areas that the journalists were tapping into, the Germans always wanted numbers. It was like, how much caviar was served at brunch? How many tons of fuel are burned on this voyage? It was very hyper specific. So, but when I sat and I'm trying to generalize what the primary differences that come down to the focus and tone of how these different regions work, the US media are generally more aspirational, travel-focused narratives. They want to focus on the service and lifestyle, mass market for some, luxury for others, and they're very brand focused. And of course, there's always that service angle to it. They write roundups all the time in addition to the features, but it's the best new ships. It's the how to get a best deal kind of roundup opportunity that the US goes for. But generally, the writing is always very polished, lifestyle oriented, celebratory words are used, big numbers, and it has a more human touch. Whereas the UK and international cruise market was interesting. They're much more critical, asking all of these more detailed questions, and they're not afraid to write about that either. So be prepared when you have international journalists in interviews and else. Very diverse perspectives. They especially the UK, their writing is very entertainment-ish. They like the shock and the wow value. It has that sensational aspect to it. And then it found even like the APAC region wants to know, when is the ship going to be in our area? Like very regional focused for coverage. So it was very interesting to see also the international was much more interested in the environmental impact and the over-tourism, and they were asking a lot more questions in that capacity versus the Americans, was like, oh, this is great square footage, of this, new suite. That's great. So it was an interesting comparison. So how we as an agency serve up information to the different markets starts with the same messaging at its core, but we've found you have to kind of hone in on what works for each individual market.
How powerful do you think the FOMO concept still is? Because Simon pointed out, for example, the importance, the relevance of these very special ports of call, or maybe it's a deal that I got that nobody else was able to get, or it's an experience on a ship. Is FOMO still sort of a common thread that globally still is something we can lean into as marketers in the cruise space?
Always. Nobody ever wants to miss out. I mean, that's the biggest thing. So having jealousy is primary. And we see that with all the social posts too that come into aspect. I mean, we work with editors all the time. And just for example, like on this particular cruise, we had there were 53 journalists, and we had, I want to say it was like 200 static posts and Instagram stories came out of that. So even the editors are posting on their personal channels and on their publication channels, because that whole FOMO aspect is there, and they're trying their best to do the job for us from marketing to get interest in eyeballs.
Yeah, fascinating. Bill, let's talk about media strategy just a little bit. A lot of the folks who are tuning in today have this very interesting task at hand of maintaining brand identity for their cruise line, for their ships. But they're also dealing with a very diverse audience. You've got the folks who've been doing this for a little while who are on the lookout for the next big opportunity. And then you've got folks like me. 5 years ago, I was that person I've traveled all my life, but it took me a while to finally get off the fence and get on the ship. Totally different approach to someone in that position, certainly. So that very diverse audience you're reaching to while still maintaining that very important brand identity. How do you see juggling that most effectively these days?
Yeah, it's a great one, Gabe. And I think it really is important to, as much as you can as a cruise brand, to really dig in on who your audience is. And to that exact point, whether it's that first time cruiser or that experienced cruiser, it's a personal experience. And it doesn't matter, again, whether you've cruised 10 times or cruising the first time, it's a personal experience. And so I think what's really important from a media standpoint, and this dovetails into some of the pieces Trey was speaking about on the strategy side, is ensuring that creative really does align with who you're speaking to, and then how that plays out on the media side. So within our media plans and the ways that we really want to focus on is ensuring that we do have placements there, which we've got a media plan that really hits on that brand awareness, but also does do a little bit more mid and low funnel depending on who you're speaking to, and that messaging really truly needs to align. So again, if you're kind of first to brand, first to cruising, maybe it's going to be that large brand awareness, CTV, linear TV type placement, print placement's going to draw you in, but it really needs to speak to you and what you're looking for. So again, if you're a multi-time cruiser, maybe it is a new ship. If you're a first-time cruiser, maybe it's the breadth of destinations available, or the itineraries. And so it's being mindful of those elements, and then again, working your way on down through that media funnel. So it really is important for brands and agencies to work together with their strategy teams, with their creative teams, and even as Lauren mentioned on the PR side of things, with those who are in the trade and those who have the ability to message to another audience, or those that might book through travel agents or OTAs, that they all understand what's available within each different cruise line and the various ships and itineraries. So it really is very important, and we at MMGY are very bullish on the need for personas, and really honing in on who we're speaking to, that we do get that right message at the right time. I know it's a little bit cliche to say that, but I think the information that Simon went through really proves out that there are some distinctions there, and depending on who you're going after, it's important to make sure that you have that alignment.
I think personalization is certainly, it's huge, right? And not to be taken for granted in the realm of those very avid cruisers, because even personalization for them changes over time. All of a sudden, I'm at a place where I got to bring my grandkids on board. That wasn't something I was looking at 10 years ago, but now as a cruiser, that is relevant to me. So personalized. And then what I find fascinating is speaking to folks who have never cruised, and understanding, hey, you're a foodie. Some of the best meals I've had have been on a cruise ship. You are into wellness. Just wait till you see the menu of options you have on board. Culturally focused. Check out these sort of new fresh ports of call. So you're right. I think that's going to be that's huge. I think the holy grail, of course, in the world of travel, and certainly in cruising, is that first timer. If we say that 13, 15, 17% of Americans are avid travelers, that means we've got a huge number of folks still to bring on board. Trey, for you, any strategies that resonate with you around that person who maybe hasn't really considered cruise in the past, maybe on the fence, is attracted to the value proposition or different sectors, all of a sudden, hey, I don't have to go that big. I can go small, or I can go that big. How do you see approaching that first time cruiser as an opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, I have to go straight to the report for this one and talk about those all-inclusive packages. That was one of the specific features that anyone, regardless of whether they were a prospective cruiser or a more seasoned cruiser, that was one of the things that everyone, regardless of country or status, were really swayed by. And I think that's, again, not to track everything back to the COVID era, but that was another thing that really popped once everybody started traveling again, was these all-inclusive resorts and packages that have really risen in popularity. And there's two key reasons for that. One is just that inflation that we've seen in the past few years had really pinched budgets. And rather than cutting back on those things, consumers are pushing and sort of reevaluating their perceptions of what they consider a good value to be. And one of the the things that has risen to the top in all of that has been these all-inclusive experiences where everything is sort of handled for them. And you know, getting into that, you know, we're also seeing increasing blurring of the lines between home and work. And you know, everywhere feels like it ties back to your work, and people are just sort of overwhelmed with everything that they have going on in their lives. And so we're seeing consumers who really value a more seamless travel and travel planning experience, and they look for brands to sort of take the work out of travel for them. And all-inclusive packages are one of the ways that they're able to do that. They have everything included for them. Everything is sort of pre-packaged and planned for them. So you know, that just really appeals to that colleague or that consumer who wants to kind of take the work out of everything. And then when we look at some of those younger consumers who may also be first-time cruisers, I think making those experiences friendlier for groups, whether those are multi-generational families, large groups of friends. These younger travelers are kind of reshaping what the travel party looks like. They're even traveling with large groups of colleagues. We've seen the term froligs, who are colleagues who are friends, start to rise. So, you know, creating these experiences where everyone can be together could be a challenge for cruises to attract those younger consumers who want everything to be a social experience where it's not just them and a significant other, it's them and their significant other plus their best friends plus grandma and grandpa, cousins, whoever they you know, want to pull in.
Froligs. I think this is the first time I've heard this phrase. I've written it down. And I'm gonna remember Trey's the first person who told me all about froligs, but I think that makes sense. I think and I think referencing the pandemic all over again, as we've exited the pandemic, I think shared experience for a lot of folks is very powerful, and that certainly can extend beyond our immediate family unit, but it can include, certainly friends that we have at work and our colleagues as well. So that a powerful medium there. And you mentioned the blur between work and everyday life. I think that while we saw in Simon's report that a lot of us see cruising as a chance to escape and disconnect, I'm a big fan of that 3-nighter where I can quickly go. And if I can actually have some powerful Wi-Fi on board to still log into some of these Zoom calls and meetings while spending a couple of hours on the Bahamas, then all the better. Lauren, Trey mentioned the younger generation, that younger crowd. Clearly, the more seasoned traveler oftentimes has the time and the income to hop on these cruises, whether it's a last-minute experience or whether they can map it out over the next 3 to 12 plus months. But I think storytelling becomes a very powerful way of attracting not just the traveling public, but this sort of new burgeoning traveler. I've got 2 teenage boys, they're well-traveled, but storytelling, whether it's what they're receiving through their friends, through our own personal family travels, or through social media channels, can be a very powerful thing to get them to pull the trigger on booking a cruise vacation. Where have you seen successes with that? How's storytelling a powerful, growing powerful way of luring that younger generation of travelers?
Yeah, great question. And it's also, how do we define younger? So like for some of the upper luxury sailings and the cruise lines there, luxury, you know, there's a price point on it. So are we looking at Gen Xers? I feel like we're like the lost generation who remembers us Xers. So, but we have very strong buying power. So how, you know, some of these luxury brands are trying to get the Xers, while you might have some more mass brands trying to get the younger millennials and into the Zs. But when looking at those age ranges more than our parents, which were the old, you know, the former, you know, big boomer era of travelers, there's a much bigger focus on unique experiences. What are we doing on these lines that's speaking to them? Is it tableside preparations of your food, you know, that everyone's taking pictures of? Is it immersive mixology experiences? There's this edutainment is sort of the word that I use to kind of, you're learning, but you're being entertained at the same time. Like that's a primary focus. Like people want to come away with some sort of learning, whether that's on the ship or it's off the ship, with different tours that are much more immersive than they might have been years past, smaller groups, like culinary discovery tours, going on markets with the chef and then coming back to the ship and cooking that stuff up. Really kind of hands-on learning has been a real sticking point for us to be able to tap into that market and really showcasing like those authentic connections. So, everyone thinks of, if you've never cruised before, everyone has a POV on it. But once you've been on a cruise, you understand how familial people can be and, how much closeness there is and new connections and new affiliations. But there was on this last cruise, actually, there was a gentleman who sailed, it was 130 times, and it was his first cruise returning after his wife had passed. And I happened to mention that story to a very young, like Gen Zer, who was a journalist for USA Today, and she was enamored with this story. And so finding that human point-to-point connection, the two of them had coffee and chatted for over an hour, and then that's turning into another story. So where do you find those authentic connection points is very important for us from a human interest angle. So I encourage people to kind of see what works and how you connect even on a non-product basis in that sense. But as we were all talking before, you mentioned FOMO and, those Instagrammable moments are so important. Is it the new bubble waffle that you're taking a picture of, or, the olive oil sommelier pouring out, your different tastings at the Italian restaurant? We live our best lives on Facebook and Instagram, and you want to show off a little bit. So, editors and writers want to do the same. They want their followers, and it's all sort of integrated these days. So while we look at influencers, I look at it, all my journalists as influencers as well. So, having them do takeovers on the social media for their outlets has been a really strong way of us tapping into those markets as well. But, at the end of the day, all of these articles and all the work that PR is doing is helping AI searches. It's helping SEO. So keep all those articles coming.
By the way, to answer your question, how do you define a young traveler? Up to the early 50s is what I'm thinking. Up to early 50s, still young traveler. Hearing you speak, Lauren, made me think of user-generated content. Should we be more open as an industry to embracing that, bringing that on board, if you will, and leveraging what the cruises themselves are putting out there? Should we be paying attention to what the cruiser is doing in their social worlds?
Absolutely. I always feel that whether you're a guest or you are a professional or whoever you are in your life and in your travels, we're all micro influencers in our own right. So, I can probably take bookings after I go on most of my trips, around the world, which are all business trips. So yes, leveraging all of the UGC that's connected. I think everyone has embraced the idea of influencers. And as we've looked at who those people are, they're much more niche, at least the ones that we're looking at, versus the former celebrity influencer that doesn't have as much engagement. So, whoever is that engagement person who matches a brand profile is going to be of great value to spread words and to get the message out in a variety of channels, because there's no need to just stick to one channel. We may as well blanket the world.
Yeah. Bill, what do you think? I mean, do you think that there's power I feel like sometimes it's easy to overlook the user-generated content that's out there. Maybe it's not as glossy as the things that we might be producing in-house. But have you seen examples of how that can be spun quite positively?
Yeah, I think there is value there. And I think, I'll put on my brand hat for a minute, you certainly need to be careful about what you are putting out there from a user standpoint, because you're kind of giving control and control of the reins over to someone that you don't have, 100% visibility into. So you want to make sure that, what you are putting out there from a user standpoint does align with your brand values. Because I think there's, potential to, have that flip the other way in a negative way. But certainly I think we live in an era where consumers are very used to that first person POV experience in the social world. And so I think tapping into that, leaning into that can really make a cruise line, a brand feel a little bit more authentic, and you can get more of the authentic feel and vibe of a destination, of an experience, of a cruise ship, rather than, sometimes what's behind the glossy image from a, creative campaign. So I think it's, using both of those in tandem, again, it kind of tying back to my earlier piece about that personalization and that messaging and who you're speaking to. The younger generations might be more inclined to lean into the user-generated content, where older cruisers, older generations, it might be, a little bit foreign to them, where they don't quite get it, or, don't want to see that. They want to, see what they're used to seeing. So I think it's being very cognizant about who you're speaking to and the creative that you're using to do that.
That's a great point. I think it comes back to personalization, all over again, and understanding every sector of your audience. By the way, for those of you tuning in, feel free to throw in questions in the Q&A box. We're going to open it up to questions here in just a moment. But Bill, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the sort of the full funnel approach. I think a lot of folks tuning in are familiar with the top of the funnel, or maybe they're really familiar with the bottom of the funnel. But when we look at cruising, it's a sector of the industry that tends to have longer booking windows, folks who are planning maybe a year out. Price points can be a little bit higher than other types of travel. How important is to have to not really lose sight of this full funnel approach when it comes to marketing and promoting a cruise?
Yep. Selfishly, I'm going to say it's very important, with where I sit, but I do think it is valuable. And I don't just say that. I think as we saw the information from Simon, whether, it's a first time cruiser or a repeat cruiser, and you kind of even alluded to it too as well, Gabe, of that experience can change over time. So I think it is important to have messaging that does fit that upper funnel awareness, whether it's itineraries, destinations, new ships, new experiences, how to experience a cruise with a growing family, as you had mentioned. If you're grandparents now and you've got kids and grandkids, understanding what that experience is like, rather than that just hard-hitting, value-driven messaging that might be a little bit more low funnel. And I think what's important too is not to lose sight of the opportunity to create those lasting experiences. I think Lauren's point about the gentleman who was on his first cruise after losing his wife and had taken swimming, I think those experiences, there's a little bit more upper funnel. And again, that leads a little bit more PR and in that realm, but it is that experience-driven messaging that you can create a lasting connection with someone that will span many cruises, many generations. Ideally, you're creating that connection for life. So I think it is important to, maintain that upper funnel messaging, but you certainly need to capture when and where it's necessary, that mid to low funnel. I mean, at the end of the day, you want to give an authentic experience. So that the cruise, the destination, the itineraries need to align with what you're saying at the outset. If you've got an image in a print publication that, depicts a cruise line next to a lush backdrop, but then the experience kind of falls through at the end there, you're missing the boat. I hate myself for saying that one, but you do kind of miss that connection. So I think it's having those talking points each of the way through to make sure that message at the top does filter all the way down, that at the end of the day, when someone gets on board, gets to their destination, hits off those different, Caribbean islands, it's what they expected. And you're creating that lasting connection throughout. So that messaging truly needs to align and needs to bring somebody all the way through from point A to point B. Yeah,
no, great point. And Trey, Bill mentions sort of the generational differences that can make cruising so appealing. Where do you see generational cruising, the sort of the generational aspect of the cruising public? How does that present opportunity, and what kind of challenges come to mind when you're tackling such a diverse audience there?
Yeah, it definitely creates an audience, but I think I would go back to, what Lauren was talking about earlier, and with the authenticity piece. And I think if we boiled what we're talking about down to one thing, it's creating cultural bridges between these generations. And I think, that is very necessary because the younger consumers are such a different culture. I think there's sort of an economic and cultural tension, especially with millennial and Gen Z travelers who have spent more time on their education, spending more time on cultural immersions. You see the rise of things like gap years in education and things like that, which is creating a situation where these travelers have not achieved some of the, I guess, what we consider traditional, cultural milestones of adulthood. That they're getting married later, having kids later, moving out of their parents' homes later, and that's kind of delaying their financial situation. But they are also the audience that has such this strong cultural curiosity and interest and want to see so much of the world. So how do we kind of create a cultural bridge between the audiences who have seen the world and really love the travel versus the audience who haven't seen as much but may not have the money to really do so? And I think, that's one of the reasons that we're seeing these multi-generational trips rise, because, baby boomers have 52% of global wealth, but represent 20% of the population. So, what's the solution? Travel with grandma and grandpa, or send the kids on a trip with grandma and grandpa. So these multi-generational trips are just one of the ways to do that. Another way that I think we're creating these cultural bridges is through nostalgia, which is something that we've seen rise in advertising and among brands. And it's kind of evolving from nostalgia to nostalgia, where things that were just 5 to 10 years old are now considered retro and being injected into culture that we see today. So it's not just about looking back for looking back's sake. It's about merging the past with the now to get that sense of simplicity and ease that people associate with the past. And I think that is increasing the representation of Gen X and baby boomers in culture that is usually saved for younger consumers. That's why we see celebrities in their 50s and 60s walking New York Fashion Week and things like that, because they're sort of merging these two worlds. And I think cruise brands can do that by borrowing from their past and merging it with their now to appeal to both of those kind of sides of the coin.
First frolics and now nostalgia.
I am
You're
full
the
of
true
buzzwords,
trendsetter.
man.
Very well done. We have a few really great questions coming in. I want to make sure we get to these before we run out of time. And I'll open this up to the three of you here. Where are onboard food and beverage trends going? I think one of my biggest surprises as I've gotten into cruising has been the fact that where once I thought it's all buffet all the time and it's food that's literally meant to just kind of feed you and get you going, some of the most unique experiences at the dinner table have been on board a ship. Where do you see those trends going? How does personalization, some of these topics we've been discussing, fit into this realm of food and beverage?
I mean, in my perspective, the elevation of cuisine has just been skyrocketing. While Oceania is known as a food forward cruise line, all the major cruise lines, and I'm sure a lot of people on this call, have really taken a very close look at their F&B programs. And I see it as, you keep on reading about all of these smaller specialty dinings that are there, and you want people to have the best meal of their life on a cruise ship. So I think the refinement is the trend that I've been noticing. The finer dining, but in a relaxed, casual atmosphere. Like, gone are the days of putting on a tuxedo for formal nights. So how does F&B sort of merge with the fashion trends of today too? It's all sort of making things a little bit more modern and updated to our likings, and a lot more brand integrations, with alcohol, beverages, and other collaborations that have been popping up too.
Yeah. Yeah, great point. Rachel Monroe has a great question. What differences do you see, if any, between a river cruiser and an ocean cruiser? And how would you market to both of these sectors differently? And I just did my first barge cruise just a few months ago. Whole different experience there. Fascinating. Are there differences there? Is there a common thread amongst these populations?
Yeah, I can jump in on that one. I think the river cruise, just because of the circumstances, they tend to be a little bit more of a social have a little bit of a social aspect to them. It's something that you get together with friends to kind of organize as almost like an event. But we're seeing more of those types of travelers want to experience ocean cruises as well. So I think we're probably going to start to see a blurring of the lines in terms of how we speak to river cruises versus ocean cruises and how we market to those travelers. Because they are more social traveler or social cruisers, the river cruiser tends to, I think, be a little bit younger or are starting to skew a little bit younger. So, I think there is more opportunity to start to promote these sorts of experiences on the channels that the younger travelers tend to play in, like social and things like that. I think those are not places that we typically see those barge experiences. So there's some huge opportunity there.
Yeah. Well, I was on a barge cruise for 12 people. I think curation is what allows a lot of those to really stand out, these sort of smaller cruises. If there's, when a larger cruise ship can adopt this curation concept where they're offering multiple experiences, but we're capping it at 12 people. It's these very unique moments, but enough of them to sort of cater to that larger audience. I think there's that can be a powerful thing. There are a couple more questions there, but we are running out of time. Suffice it to say, we will be following up with folks after this webinar. There will be a recording made available in the next couple of days. By week's end, we will have this to your inboxes, the recording of this webinar. I want to throw two quick emails out there if you want to follow up with my friends at the marketing team at Travelzoo. That email is marketing@travelzoo.com, marketing@travelzoo.com, and on the MMGY side, communications@mmgyglobal.com, communications@mmgyglobal.com. But this has been a lot of fun. Unfortunately, now it's time to drop anchor as we reach the top of the hour. But I do want to say thanks to Lauren and to Bill and to Trey and obviously to Katie and Simon who kicked this all off. I think the cruise industry represents what is so exciting about the travel industry as a whole, in that there is so much opportunity out there, very captive audience, but perhaps obviously an even bigger audience to reel on board, and then that creates an amazing amount of opportunity. Whether we're on the West Coast, East Coast, on the other side of the Atlantic, et cetera, it's a global opportunity phenomenon to be sure. Great to be with everybody. We'll see you on the high seas soon enough, and thanks for joining us today.
You guys.